Hi, my name is Phil Sciuto, Director of Solutions Architecture with HGST, a Western Digital brand. And today we're going to talk to you about the 3-geo deployment model of the Active Archive object store. And what we mean by the 3-geo deployment model is where we take 3 Active Archive appliances and interconnect them into 3 separate locations using redundant WAN connectivity links, thus taking and turning it into a single unified cluster that can be accessed from any one of those 3 locations. The first benefit that this gives us is obviously going to be site level resiliency. And what I mean by that is that you can lose any one of these 3 locations either because of a network connectivity failure or because of a site failure, and the other 2 systems will continue to function in their full capacity for both read and write in a transparent way for the customers or for your end clients. And when that third site, that site that went down, comes back up, it rejoins the mesh, and everything comes back up to full availability and full durability. So it's really a high availability deployment model for our Active Archive object store. The second benefit to a 3-geo deployment model is a feature we call is that it's immediately consistent. And what we mean by that is that the data that is ingested into the system at any one of the locations, so for instance, if we ingest data at this location, that data will enter the system and immediately be encoded via erasure coding and dispersed over to the other 2 locations before the client receives a success response. The benefit of this is that it means that any subsequent reads, so a subsequent read here, here, or here, will always return the same data. It means that each of these 3 locations is always consistent. You never run into data inconsistency issues at all. And this gives us a third benefit to the system. These derive from one from another, but that third derived benefit is that you can deploy it in something called an active-active deployment model. And meaning that data activity can happen at any of these 3 sites, and it can happen at all of them. Reads and writes can be dispersed and deployed, or can be utilized at each location concurrently without worrying about data consistency or inconsistency. And this is a different type of deployment model than what we traditionally see in a traditional object storage deployment, which is something that typically is deployed in something called active-passive. And that's using an eventual consistency model, which is typically seen in object stores. And by that, you have 2 sites. One will be deployed in an active state. One will be deployed as a passive site, meaning that 100% of your client activity is going to be pushed to the first location. And then that data is stored here, where success response has gone back, and over time, in an asynchronous method, that data is trickled down to the passive site, meaning that there's an inconsistency from time to time from the data located here and the data located here. Data that's retrieved at the passive site can be stale, can be non-existent. So typically, customers will drive 100% of their traffic to one location and use the secondary site as just a failover. So this gives us a couple of challenges when we're using this as a deployment model. One is that site has to be provisioned with 100% of the resources needed to support the load. That passive site needs to be fully provisioned as well, but rarely used, which ultimately means that in order to get the throughput you need, you have to deploy 200% of the resources you need to support the load, which could add up to additional cost for hardware, additional cost for bandwidth, additional cost for site real estate and power. With the Active Archive, you don't need to do that. You're basically spreading the load equally across the 3 sites, meaning that 100% of your load utilizes 100% of the hardware, reducing costs, reducing complexity, reducing residual costs for infrastructure. And with the 3-geo deployment model, you get site-level resiliency, immediate data consistency, and you can deploy in an active-active deployment method. I'm Phil Sciuto. Thanks for watching.